Welcome to Underdubs, a podcast about 70s progressive rock and more. This podcast is a conversational music variety show with a focus on the classic progressive rock artists of the 1970s and how their music has shaped culture, technology, and the music of today. We'll, of course, cover the classic prog bands like Yes and Genesis, but also other forms like the Canterbury scene, neo-prog, proto-prog, and fusion, and all points in between. Your hosts, Brian Donahue and Pat Strauser, are two of the founding members of the instrumental progressive rock fusion band Volare, based in Athens, Georgia, from the mid-1990s. In this episode, we talk to keyboard player and arranger-composer Eric Baumgartner of Hatfield and the Health, a Canterbury scene tribute group based in the UK and the US. We discuss his musical background, the band and its origins, how he gets those distinctive Canterbury-esque sounds out of his keyboard rig, their set list, and much more. Be sure to check out the links that we provide in the notes for playlists and other content that we discuss here. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Pat. What's up?
Lots. Today, we have a good friend of mine, Eric Baumgartner, who is a keyboard player and composer and arranger who lives in the Atlanta area. And Eric has a very interesting project that I think our listeners will be very into. He is in a Canterbury scene tribute band called Hatfield and the Health that was started a couple of years ago. And when I first heard about this, I just was floored. I was floored at the fact that it existed, let alone that someone I knew was a part of it. So so I thought, I got to give Eric a call, and we got to talk to him. So, Eric, welcome to Underdubs. It is great to see you.
Thank you both. Wonderful to see you.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be here.
Eric, you are a gigging musician in the Atlanta area and have been for a long time.
Correct, yeah.
Have you always been a Canterbury fan?
Not initially. I grew up in Northeast Ohio outside of Cleveland. Was big time into pop music, Beatles, Elton John, etc. At the time, the late 70s, there were a handful of progressive acts that were quite huge. I mean, they would play the arenas and such, particularly Yes and Jethro Tull. So me and my friends were big fans of them. Then eventually into Genesis and such. But it wasn't until I went to college in Boston, at Berklee College of Music, that I met a lot of other musicians from around the world and eventually heard about the Canterbury scene. Ironically, to do full circle, it was the drummer who is with our Hatfield and the Health project, Nick Allen, from the UK, who was also at Berklee at the time. And he's the one who brought in loads of tapes of all this wonderful music. And so that's where I first heard of the Canterbury scene and just said, what in the world is this? It was just wonderfully whimsical and musical and quirky and very, very British as well. I mean, you just listen to Richard Sinclair sing with Hatfield in the North or with Caravan, and he makes no effort to conceal his very British accent, and it's delightful. And the subject matter was just so off the wall and so whimsical. So, yeah, I was taken with it right away and became a big fan, particularly of the bands that Dave Stewart was involved with, Egg, Hatfield in the North, National Health, but also eventually Caravan, a bit of Matching Mole, some of the early Soft Machine with Robert Wyatt, then eventually Gilgamesh, with Alan Gowan. And yeah, I think it's just wonderful. And I've spent the last 40 years trying to, spread the gospel. And anytime somebody seems to have an interest in, unusual, very musical albums, I always will steer them to Rodder's Club or Land of Grey and Pink, etc.
Yeah.
So Berklee in 81, is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before Berklee, what is your musical background before Berkeley? Like, how did you get started playing?
Took piano lessons as a child around age 7 and was doing sort of the classical thing. Later on, like in 5th grade, 6th grade, you start to discover, pop radio, Elton John, and you hear piano played very differently than what I was doing, and say, that's kind of cool. So it kept me interested in music, and I think it was really the pop music and Elton John specifically who helped me develop my ear. Then eventually got into playing with some bands in high school. As I said, just tried to absorb as much music as I possibly could, but definitely had a leaning towards the progressive and the theatrical. So Queen, I was a big fan of Queen. Like I said, Jethro Tull and Yes, and then it just kind of continued into college as I met more people from around the world who would, brought their collections to school, and it just became wow. Oh yeah, Steely Dan was another big favorite. Back in high school, ELO as well. I tended to like very cleverly crafted pop music. Ones that had a lot of interesting chord progressions. I mean, you get into something like Queen, for instance, and just hearing progressions, that kind of movement, you just kind of go, oh, that's marvelous. What is that? So I think I was always taken by clever harmonic progressions.
So you're playing in bands.
Mm-hmm.
You're into Queen and Steely Dan and the prog stuff. So you go to Berkeley. What's your move after that? Do you start playing in rock bands and stuff, or what's the career move?
The career move was just being a freelancer. Yeah.
Okay.
I eventually made my way to Chicago and went to graduate school at DePaul for jazz studies. I wanted to go to an area where I felt had an active music scene. So that was great. So I was playing with a lot of bands, wedding bands, klezmer bands, you name it, and doing a lot of theater. I also got involved in music publishing with Hal Leonard, and I still work with them. And then in 2011, and so we moved to Midtown, and again, doing a lot of theater. I still work with the Alliance Theater here in town, the Atlanta Gay Men's Chorus, a number of tribute bands, the Troubadour Project, Yacht Rock Schooner, and Pat and I had worked with them together. Elton Live, A1A, a Jimmy Buffett tribute band. So every weekend is something a little bit different. But it's kind of funny how things go full circle. I grew up with this music in the 70s, and now these tribute bands are all the rage, and people are into the nostalgia. So here I am, playing Elton John again, and ELO, and all these bands. So it's fun, yeah.
Like the experience of the professional musician these days is centered around tribute artists, because that's where we can reliably get a paycheck.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in knowing that about you, because I knew you did all that stuff, but it's like, wow, what do you do? I do a bunch of tribute work and to pay the bills, basically. I mean, I know you do other things. I mentioned that because when I found out about Hatfield and the Health, I thought, oh wow, well that is not something you see every day. That's
true.
That's the kind of tribute that we all like to see. It's like, this is not a money gig.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, to say the least. Yes. Labor of love in the truest sense of the word. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, well, tell us, how did that whole thing hatch? I mean, where does someone get the idea to put together that kind of a tribute?
Well, I mentioned my friend Nick earlier, Nick Allen from the UK. We had met at Berkeley and became good friends right away, and we kept in touch over the years. In 2016, he married an American, actually. They had their wedding in the Boston area, and I got to meet some of his good friends at the time who I'd known about, particularly Simon Thorpe, and we hit it off right away. And he's a bass player, guitarist, and singer. And during lockdown, we kind of hit upon the idea of, why don't we do, like, as was the trend at the time, a lockdown project. So we all said, well, it's got to be, Hatfield in the North. And so we ended up doing a handful of recordings together. And we just loved it. We just tried to recreate, the recordings as best we could. And it gave us, a chance just to sit down and transcribe and work out all the nitty gritty of these recordings. And we loved the results so much. And we said, geez, we got to do this, live. At that point, Simon said that he'd always wanted to do a tribute band doing Hatfield and the North National Health and call it Hatfield and the Health. And we said, okay, that's easy enough. And we decided, okay, let's make this happen. And so planned for a couple of weeks that I could go to the UK. Simon and Nick had some musician friends, some jazz musicians. Simon particularly is very active in the jazz scene in London. And we got two wonderful people to fill out the ensemble, Mark Ridout on guitar, and Karen Sharp to do reeds. So she just brought so much with a tenor sax, clarinet, bass clarinet, and a flute. So it allowed us to do just so many different colors. We just did all the prep, remotely. They rehearsed a little bit together, without me. When I arrived in the UK, I think we had maybe one and a half rehearsals. And it's just like bam, 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 bam. And then we did a handful of gigs. This is 2022, the summer. And it was just wonderful. Particularly the three of us just, love this music so much that it was to get a chance to perform it live and see the reaction because the audience, of course, is going to be more of a niche audience. This is not, the same kind of reach or scope of Yes or King Crimson or something. But they're extraordinarily passionate about this music, as we are. So right. Any of our nerves vanished right away as soon as we played because the smiles, we saw grown men in tears. They would come up to us afterwards saying, I never thought I'd hear this music played live again. And we kept on hearing the stories of, oh yeah, I saw Hatfield back in 75 at this little club or this, that, or I saw National Health. So it was just such a warm and overwhelming reaction that we said, oh, we have to keep this up. This is just too much fun. So we did it again last summer in 23, expanded it to a few more shows, including a show in Hastings, as well as London. And it's great. And we've had a lot of good feedback. Richard Sinclair, we also do some Caravan and some Matching Mole and a little bit, surprises here and there. But primarily Hatfield and the North, National Health, and Caravan would be third. But Richard Sinclair from the beginning gave his blessing. He, mentioned us in his, posts and such, and has even talked about collaborating, like to do some shows together.
Wow.
Logistically, I'm not sure how we can make that happen. He's in Italy, so it's difficult to coordinate all this. But at the shows, people who were on those recordings came out and saw us. Neil Murray, the bass player for the First National Health, Amanda Parsons, the singer from that, as well as Brian Hopper, Hugh's brother, and Dave Sinclair's son, Nicholas, saw our Hastings show. And so it's been wonderful to get that feedback. And then, the online community too, Phil Howitt, who does like the Facelift blog, he came, he did a nice feature on us last year. So it's just been delightful. The reception's been warm. It's been musically a wonderful challenge. But because, we know the music so, well in terms of absorbing it all these years, I think we all have a pretty good, feel and flavor for it. But it's demanding. We're all using charts because it's, it's not like doing a night of Foghat, for instance. Nothing against Foghat.
Right. That Foghat has its own challenges.
I take that back. Everything against Foghat. But it was just delightful. We're probably not going to be able to do any shows this year, but we definitely, the passion is there, and so we'll look to regroup and do some shows the next year.
Cool. So I checked out some of the YouTube clips, which I'm sure we will also link to from this podcast for listeners to check out. And I was really blown away, Eric. I mean, it sounded great. The first one I watched was a Bryden two-step, which is arrangement wise not a simple piece of music, and you guys sounded great. And the horns, like the switching between the clarinet, and I think there's also a trombone player.
Oh yes, we had a guest. Yes, occasionally we would bring in a guest or two. Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's a solo around the middle of the song that I always thought was a fuzz bass solo, but I think you played it on the low keys. Was that, am I wrong, or was it you turned a bass solo into a keyboard feature?
I think that might be an organ. That's one of the things that's quintessentially Canterbury scene, is that fuzz organ sound. I don't know if you guys had talked about it previously, but I had heard that because synthesizers were so expensive that they just hit upon the idea of putting an organ through a fuzz box, but it became kind of a quintessential Canterbury sound. Maybe Mike Ratledge with Soft Machine is the first to do it. I'm not sure.
I always thought so. I thought it went from Ratledge to Dave Sinclair to Dave Stewart, but I don't know.
Yeah. And because what's funny is they all used it. I have a little wah. That's kind of the sound that they had. And I remember first hearing these recordings, and I wouldn't know what that was. It sounded, I thought it was a guitar, but you don't hear any of the pitch manipulation. You don't hear any vibrato or anything. And then you also get that, that lovely kind of dissonance with it. So, I think that's what is on the recording there. But I think we definitely, too, you made a few little switches just to be able to perform live and make concessions in that way. Yeah. But that's, again, wild because I think I have 13 or 14 presets used, because on the recording there's overdubbed, organ and piano and what have you. So you're just going from, one to the other, and then it's going from, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you always have to be, on your guard, because it's again, it ain't Foghat, ladies and gentlemen.
So, Eric, you use one keyboard on performance for this?
Yeah, and if the Nord Stage wasn't around, I don't know how I could do it. I have a Nord Stage 3.
Is that the dual manual?
No, it's just it's what I have, this sitting on right now. It's just a full 88 key keyboard, but there's several things that make it possible to do, something like this. One is it allows you to go seamlessly from one preset to another. So you can be holding, down notes, and then you could switch to the next sound, then it would be a seamless transition.
Oh, nice.
Either with the sustain pedal, keeping your hands on, you don't have that hard click. Plus the fact it's just infinitely programmable. It's wonderful, and we rented one in the UK, but I saved, all my programs, on the laptop, and then just when we got there, hooked it up, and it worked beautifully. Because, of course, you're trying to replicate, in some cases, 6 different keyboards. And, of course, we've all seen the pictures of back in the day of Rick Wakeman surrounded by, all these. And you can do a fair approximation, with the Nord. So I was very pleased about that. One of the things, I don't know, Pat, if we've ever talked about this, Dave Stewart's, his Rhodes sound. I love the sound of his Rhodes. I don't know, and you can do a fairly good, approximation with the Nord here, but it was bright, but not harsh. It was just a very warmth, brightness to it, and you could just kind of hear that the tines, and it was just it's a really inviting sound. So I did my best.
Real belly.
Yeah, very
real belly.
Yeah. But I loved the sound that he had, and it could be more like a straight sound, or I could also have it be overdriven a little, and it was just something that was so tied to the Hatfield recordings and National Health as well. I just adored his particular one, probably my favorite road sound that I've heard.
So how much of, I'm thinking in particular of that buzz organ sound, like the quintessential Canterbury Ratledge Stewart sound. How much of that was, are you starting from a Hammond preset in the box and then you tweak it? Are you using samples that you fly in from somewhere else?
No,
how are you building
I tried
that
a
sound?
whole bunch of things, and what I found worked best is actually just to have, that's the straight tone, is just the B3 with a little vibrato and no Leslie. And then I will use an amp simulator. And where do we have that? And then that's the same sound with it. And I put in probably half a dozen different ones because you listen to Dave Sinclair's version, and maybe it doesn't have the vibrato, or maybe it has more of the upper overtones. And so I kept on trying to find the ones that work best, for the pieces. But yeah, I also tried doing like the sample and bringing it in, because the Nord can do that too. But I found like just having, the onboard effects, it worked very well. Particularly live, like when you hear it in the mix, and you're not hearing it isolated like this. I think it works very well.
It sounds fantastic. It made me fall in love with the sound all over again.
Yeah.
So to trigger the wah, is that an aftertouch thing, or do you have a wah pedal?
No, I have a pedal. So, and again, the Nord's very clever. So you can have a preset where you've activated the wah pedal. So I think on this patch, no, I don't have it on that one. That was just volume. But I know I have it like for Tenemus Roads. I think it's this one. Yeah, and then of course you can activate these, in real time. This is another reason why I love the Nords, is because all the essential knobs are just right out in the open. So it's tricky because the part of the practice and the choreography is just knowing, hold, switch to next one, switch to next. And so the music I carefully would, map out when these switches would come. You do enough of it, and you, like I said, you practice the choreography of making the switches as part of, of playing the chord changes. You just get used to, this is what comes next in the song.
We hope you're enjoying the interview so far. Again, just a reminder to check out our show notes and description section for playlists and links to everything we're talking about in this episode. We've put together a YouTube playlist of footage of Hatfield and the Health so you can see and hear them in action. Now, back to the interview. So I had a question for you about these arrangements as far as getting the charts prepared. I'm presuming that none of these charts were just readily available to you. So are you creating the charts yourself and then sending them to the other players? Is everyone in kind of involved in their own homework and coming up with their own?
It was essentially me and the bassist Simon. And so we would both kind of do our own, but then write for the others as well. So Simon did most of the legwork, like for writing the charts for Karen, and for Mark, for our reed and guitarist. And we would compare notes, and but it did just involve the two of us particularly sitting down, and just going over and over, which is it was a lovely excuse to be able to do that. You know what I mean? Because I don't know if I would just sit down and try to dissect every little nuance of this stuff on my own. I'm too lazy for that. So to have an outlet and say, wow, which was great. And the thing about it is some of the progressive rock stuff is wonderfully adventurous, but not necessarily harmonically so. if you follow me. It might be, I mean, Genesis I love, but a lot of it's triadic. I mean, you're having different left hand than right, and such, but and seventh chords,
Sure.
But with Hatfield and the North National Health, the Dave Stewart stuff, there's a sophistication that I don't know if you'd be able to really handle without some jazz experience. So you get these not just simply seventh chords, but your ninths and 13ths and all kinds of hybrid things. That is just wonderful. And they wouldn't use it in traditional ways. I mean, some R&B artists are like Stevie Wonder, I adore. But Stevie will tend to use these, lush chords, but in a more faithful way, 2, 5, 1s and such, and move around a lot. But these would be a little, like, for instance, I have a Phil Miller tune up here, Lounging There Trying, and you listen to just the lovely, unexpected, and I love this bit too. So it's just really, and then you'd have a connecting melody that would just work, over these changes. And I found that just so wonderfully inviting and whimsical. And I think that was Dave Stewart's influence. Dave Stewart, definitely had that same sophistication with harmony. And I got to thinking as I was doing these too, if Dave Stewart had been listening to a lot of Steely Dan, you'll see him use those same chords. It's kind of a substitute for a major seventh that has no third, like a G over C. So they're somewhat ambiguous. They have, the sort of the function of a major seventh, but he does this all the time. And another one that I think from Steely Dan is that one. So like Deacon Blues. And you see Dave Stewart using that too as kind of a connector, all the time. And so I'm curious about, I never think I've heard about Dave Stewart and Steely Dan, but they're the two that I see, those unique, the use of harmony in that particular instance.
On a personal note, I have to make a comment about that because I remember not liking Steely Dan for many years. And I got into the National Health Complete. I will probably mention it at some point on every one of these podcasts because it was such an astounding influence on me. It was sort of like the thing that made me like jazz.
There it is.
Yes. That along with those liner notes. Yeah. I mean, everything. Of course, I was familiar with his keyboard article, Behind the Music. Is that what it was called? Or Inside the Music or something like that? You remember his article that he would publish every issue of Keyboard Magazine.
Right.
In the 90s, I remember he had it. And he talks about a lot of that stuff, removing, hey, we're not going to play the root, we're going to play the 5. And look how it changes this major 7 on top, stuff like that. So I totally hear what you're saying about the Steely Dan connection. Also, the use of the Fender Rhodes is replete in both catalogs, and I loved it in National Health, and it's the thing that made me like it in Steely Dan.
Interesting,
later, because when I got the Steely Dan, but when I first heard it, I'm like, this sounds corny. I thought it was corny. Well, because it sounded like smooth jazz, which was, to me at the time, being a 20-year-old, I was like, that smooth jazz is not cool. It is not rock and roll. It is not, it's just like, man, I don't want to listen to it. It's very similar, I think, in a lot of ways. I think that's an interesting point. I never really quite picked up on that, but I'm with you on it.
The National Health compilation CD, Missing Pieces. Do you have that one?
I do, yeah.
The song Clocks and Clouds that's on there, beautiful song. I think to me that's one of my favorite Dave Stewart Rhodes recordings.
Oh, yeah.
And Amanda Parsons' vocals on that are just outstanding.
Yeah.
Just one of my favorite vocal performances ever.
Yeah.
Did you meet her at one of the shows, or you just heard that she was there, or did you get to speak to her?
I didn't get a chance to speak with her. I knew that she was there. What we all found after the shows is we all get into these conversations with people, And unfortunately, you'll get a chance to talk with everybody. So it's kind of like, who did you talk to? And so
right.
I think Simon and Nick both had chatted with her, and she was very complimentary. But I didn't get a chance to talk to her after the show, unfortunately.
Wow.
But I love the fact how, like they would have the instrumental pieces. They would have more of the song-based ones, Richard Sinclair. But they'd also have these lovely instrumental bits where these three angelic voices would come in, mumps and such. It's just marvelous. And it's a shame National Health didn't keep that up. They just had Amanda on the first record. And then the second one, Q's and Cures, no female voices, I think, on that. You had John Greaves singing. Like Binoculars, but mostly instrumental. Yeah,
and the arrangements are not quite as, what's the word? I think there's less instrumentation.
Well, yeah, because
is that right?
Alan Gowan was still part of. I mean, he was part of the initial conception for National Health, and even though I think he was no longer a member when the first album was released, he's on several of the tracks. I think he receives composer on some, and if not a full composer. So as a result, you would have the two keyboardists on several of the tracks where it might be Rhodes and synths and such, as opposed to necessarily to being Dave Stewart overdubbing everything himself. Yeah, but you're right. It did have, even though the second one did have plenty of guests. We got to mention Jimmy Hastings, who passed away recently. Just I adored his playing, particularly as a flautist. I thought his flute solo in Binoculars alone is just, and in your namesake in Underdub, he plays the flute in that, and some wonderful sax work. And of course, he did brilliant work with Caravan as well. His brother of Pi Hastings from Caravan. But he's on that, and some of the folks from Henry Cow, like on A Square for Maud. I think there's some other guests on that recording as well. But I think, Pat, to your point, it does tend to be a bit more stripped down compared to how ornate the first album was.
Now, your set list, like you said, centers around the Health material and the Hatfield material, but you do some other stuff. The Caravan.
We did Golf Girl. I
saw that video.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's fun because Simon, a bassist, naturally, I think he's able to capture Richard Sinclair very nicely.
He did.
Yeah. So it was kind of like, we were doing the Lockdown project, and we were saying, well, who's going to sing? How are we going to get a Richard Sinclair? And inside just said kind of sheepishly, well, I'll give it a go, and send it back to us. I think it was Share It, and we just, we were floored. We said, this is wonderful. This is great, No need to go out and put an ad in the Melody Maker,
He did a good John Greaves on Binoculars.
Yes, yeah. So we did. We also did all of 9 Feet Underground.
Oh wow!
Oh, that's right. I saw that. Yeah.
My gosh.
We did decide to truncate it a bit this year because it just goes on. But we did that. And also we broke it up because on the recording, every other moment it's Dave Sinclair doing another fuzz organ solo. So we gave the guitarist some, and we gave But that was just very cheeky to try to do that. And you get people singing along to every word. I saw some of the video from the house, and you're just hearing, all these guys just singing along loudly, and so it was wonderful. It was very sweet. We did Winter Wine, one of my favorites of theirs. That might be it for them. We also did a matching mole tune, "O Caroline," the one that was a co-write of when Dave Sinclair was in the band for the first matching mole. And Robert Wyatt wrote the lyrics to that. Snuck in a few surprises. Did a little Henry Cow. I think I sent you that, Pat. My wife came on stage during, just doing an Anarchy improv. and did a bit of that into Dagmar, some questions about hats from Henry Cow and Slap Happy. And then we went into Square for Maud, because then she did the,
oh, cool.
Is it luminosity, that little bit, the thing that Peter Bledved does on that. And it was wonderful because she just wanders on stage while we're doing this, and people are going, "What's going on? Who is this person?" and then she got a tremendous ovation, and she hammed it up, and it was just fun. Try to capture some of the whimsy that they would put in their shows, So
you guys have a healthy. I'm looking at a set list here from the Canterbury-esque did an interview with you guys, and it's 20 tunes or so, something like that. I mean, it's a pretty healthy, no pun intended, set list.
It was pretty ambitious. And yeah, I mean, full props to Simon in particularly of really sitting down and making sure that because our two, they're full members, but they came into, the picture late. They were unfamiliar with this music. They were jazz people. And I think you really have to be, like I said, come from that world. Otherwise, it would be very hard to kind of navigate the changes and such. And both were brilliant soloists. They brought so much to the live show. But Simon, just took the time to transcribe and to do specific arrangements for them. And so it went so well when we met up last year. We only did one rehearsal, and it felt good. I mean, just having that year in between, and because we were all just kind of like eyes to the music the first year, but we could have a bit more fun last year and look around more and take our eyes away from our instruments as we got to play. It's sort of like it makes you envy in some ways, the scene back in the day where this was their full-time gig. They'd be rehearsing and writing and then performing. And to be able to do that, as a full-time endeavor, you can imagine how tight you could get, with that kind of repetition.
Oh, yeah.
And so trying to do it very, very quickly like this was ambitious, but we were all up to it, I think, and I just enjoyed it. And again, the talking with people and the reaction that we got was just so warm. It was such a pleasure, and it makes us want to continue to do it.
Just based on the little YouTube videos that I've seen, I was also struck and impressed by the rest of the band. The drummer sounded great in the role of Pip Pile.
Yeah, Nick is brilliant, and it's funny because this was the first time we had a chance to play together properly, after knowing each other all these years. But yeah, I think he has an excellent, feel for that. And he was the only one brave enough not to use any charts.
I noticed that when I watched the Bryden two-step video. Everybody else had charts. And what impressed me is there's a lot of accents. There's a lot of drum and bass, got to get this right moments.
No, yeah, which we were all very impressed with. But again, it kind of speaks to how much this music means to him and how long he's known it. What's funny, because Nick and Simon go way back, and even back, like they're slightly older than me, and so they remember this stuff the first time around. Like seeing National Health on Old Grey Whistle Test. And if you haven't seen it, they do the Calypso. It's just brilliant, and John Greaves, taking like a tray of cutlery and smashing it. And it's funny because I don't think that, like in the liner notes for the complete, I don't think Dave Stewart was terribly happy with it because he'd already left the band at that time. I think it was Alan Gowan was going to come in. But they were committed to do that. But it's wonderful to have, and they had been in correspondence with some of those people, and Simon also being in the jazz scene had played with Jimmy Hastings on several times. Same with our reed player, Karen Sharp, had done. I think she did regularly for years. Played in an ensemble with Jimmy Hastings as part of the horns and brass. And she didn't know at the time this other career he had. she didn't know that he had been on these all wonderful recordings and such. So, yeah. So there's the connection and the love of the music goes way back, particularly for Nick and Simon. And also, it's not an easy thing just to even find appropriate venues. We get loads of inquiries saying, when are you going to come to the West Country, or up north, or even, to the continent, or to the States. We've had people ask about that too, and we've been toying with it, but it's very, very expensive to bring everybody and deal with the equipment and all that. But I think we've seen enough kind of interest, amongst those passionate fans, as small numbers as they may be, that I think we can go ahead and try something a bit more ambitious. I mean, we even had tried and contacted clubs, or they contacted us, and then they just realized that it wasn't feasible for them to do it, financially, without guaranteeing a sellout and such. So it's a challenge. It's interesting, too, reading about those bands back in the day, and, they had similar challenges. I think that's really why Hatfield broke up in the first place, is, Richard Sinclair had a young family, and it was just too difficult living, gig to gig. Sometimes there would be very few people and such. So we'll see. But there's enough passion that we have for it, enough motivation that we'll make it happen. But it'll probably still be pretty small in scope for all the reasons I mentioned.
I had read another thing. It might have been on that same interview, that something about you guys possibly doing some original compositions.
Oh, yeah,
as well?
we have. In fact, for our last year, Simon wrote a lovely song called Together and Apart for his wife. And hopefully we have some video of that online too. Because he really captured, I think, the flavor of what the music that we're doing, but made it his own. It's just a lovely original piece.
Right.
And we're careful about it, though. We don't want to do, people are there to hear, the big golden oldies, the hits of the day, back then. And
right.
So we're sensitive to that.
We want to hear Tenemus Roads, Tenemus Roads, Tenemus.
Yeah. Oh, but it's fun. I mean, talking about, again, the instrumentation, things like we discovered, I think Simon did this, there's the fuzz guitar as well that Phil Miller would use. And we found that the bass clarinet coupled with the fuzz guitar is a brilliant sound. So for the melody of Tenemus Roads, we had them both play. Actually, that was clarinet. Well, for the beginning of, like, Bryden, where there's that synthesizer thing, we have her playing bass clarinet. It works beautifully. So we tried to, tweak things to fit our instrumentation, and we had such talented players, and we did our best to find some clever arrangements so that all the important bits were covered.
The guitar player's Phil Miller tone
isn't it great?
Sounded spot on to me.
I as soon as I first heard him do that, I just was smiling, ear to ear. It was just, it was wonderful. And again, I don't know how he captured. I don't know how he captured Phil's playing so well, having not been raised with this music. It was just extraordinarily versatile and huge, ears. Is able to absorb and say something like that, and then again make it his own. He can go off in directions for his improvisation that were uniquely Mark. And so it's just, I mean, I would be hard pressed to find anything that has been remotely negative or unpleasant about the whole experience. Simon and Nick are great friends. You get along terrifically. All our wives get along, famously. It's just wonderful to hang. I mean, in Hastings, we're out there playing miniature golf together, and it's just wonderful. And the Karen and Mark were the perfect fits. The right temperament, the right talent. Experience and such. So it's been a joy, and that's for all those reasons we want to keep it active, and we'll look towards doing some special things in next summer.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Well, is there any other parting thoughts or words? Anything you would like us to kind of plug?
One thing that's kind of unique that's coming up at the Variety Theater, June 21st, I think it is. It's a Yacht Rock Schooner with the Atlanta Gay Men's Chorus doing a night of
the
Queen show.
The
Yeah,
Queen.
we did it.
Yeah,
No kidding.
We did it pre-lockdown, and it was just one of my favorite gigs ever. So you got the band, and we augment it with some of our friends, Scott Patton on guitar from the Troubadour Project. Let me look at the date. That is Friday, June 21st at the Variety Theater. Yeah, we did it pre-lockdown, and we had 100 men from the chorus on stage, and it was just brilliant. We have to scale it down. This year we'll probably have 25 of them, but it'll still be full enough. Partly because it's just a challenge to mic everybody properly. So they'd be singing their heart out, but when the band's kicking in, it's a little harder to hear in the house. But I did all the vocal arrangements. So I sat down with the Queen records, and you have this luxury of when you have things that are so ornate as like a Bohemian Rhapsody or Somebody to Love, where they overdubbed until the tape turned transparent, as they said. But we have enough parts, including wonderful tenor section who can do all of that screechy high Roger Taylor stuff, and as well as basses and everything in between. So virtually all the parts that are on the record, the big sound, we can replicate, and so it's a glorious sound. It's wonderful, and it was so much fun that we decided to remount it. So that's the 21st of June, and so that's my plug. I'll plug that show.
Yeah, I would love to hear that. Well, tell us where we can find out more about Hatfield and the Health.
We have a Facebook page. We have a website. I think it's just hatfieldandthehealth.com. So those would be the two main sources. That's basically the good places to check us out.
Man, it was great to have you.
This has been wonderful, guys. I just love geeking out on this music. It's just, it's wonderful. Spread the word.
Thanks for joining us again on this episode of Underdubs. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.